So if process is so important, right? Hopefully, Lance and I have conveyed how important we think it is. Maybe we should talk a little bit about how we define a process, right? How do we go through that process of discovering and defining? And I think one of the cool things about what we do is new technology enters the stage, and process mining has been around for a while. Quite a few years ago, I got my first exposure to it in a demo, and it looks like magic, right? You hook it up to a log file, and you can, in an automated way, discover the process. That is kind of an amazing, experience the first time you see it. They can even do some animation of like, here's how the process ran, and show you kind of historically how it works. So, we can gain insights into how a process is actually executed by looking at the data in the systems that are used. And that is an advantage over the perception of how it's executed, in that it's reality. It's just what's happening. However, there are some issues. And, one of them is that I may not understand the context of what's happening, right? So I have the data, but do I understand it? And, so these insights that we get may confirm our perceptions of the process, or they may cause us to rethink our perceptions of the process or restudy them. It can reduce the need for interviews, or it certainly can introduce or reduce the need for doing time series, right? Where you're actually checking how long does it take them to do X, Y, or Z activities. And it can help identify some of the causes of poor performance, like bottlenecks in the process. So that's something that can be quite helpful. And there are additional uses for process mining that are related. So process discovery is kind of the first good use case for process mining. Performance mining is another, right, where you really look at the bottlenecks or how processes change or possibly break down as volumes increase. It can be really helpful for simulation as well as historical reads. There's also a need for conformance checking. If I improve the process or change it, does it still conform to our expected behavior or a new design? And I would propose that this is maybe more interesting in a world with RPA, where rather than orchestrating a new process, I might have automated pieces of the process. And then I want to check, are we actually still following the process? And I can use process mining as a way to do that conformance checking. And finally, you can look at variant analysis, right? Compare different event logs, right? Different this week versus last week, or this market versus that market, and see how the processes that are actually being run on the ground, how they might differ, and see if I can find opportunities for improvement or standardization or deviation. So now the question is, okay, how do I make all that magic work, right? Always the catch with a new technology is there's some requirement, right? Because so what do I need to make it work? The answer is you need system logs across various applications and platforms that generate and log events against the tasks or activities and the users and resources involved in the process. So if you use SAP for a bunch of stuff, but you use Oracle Financials, you may need both logs from SAP and Oracle to make it work, right? And what you want to do is produce or transform that data into an event log, ideally XCS format, so that you can import it into a variety of process mining tools. And we're going to show you a quick demonstration of one of those tools. It's an open source tool called Apermore or Apermore. I'm never sure if it's if you pronounce the last syllable or not. And the last bullet is really key, right? The real work is on data preparation to feed your process mining tools. So whenever we have someone ask us for help in process mining, what they really are asking for help with is the data preparation. And then at the end, how do I analyze what I got out of it? Like, so once I have the data, how do I make sense out of it? And we certainly can excel at helping you with both of those, but you'll see some interesting cases where someone say, well, I want to do process mining. So what I need is someone who is an expert on these 15 legacy systems that we have to pull the data out. And you just can't find the one person who knows all of those things all at the same time to an equal level of expertise. And my advice is, look, data integration is a thing, and it's something that we at BP3, our team members, and other teams have done for many, many decades, right? So it's just something you power through. If we were building a process for you and I had to integrate to those systems, we'd figure it out. If we have to pull the data out to feed process mining, we'll figure it out. All right, a bit about the event log. You need a case ID, something to identify that all of these activities are related, say to one customer order or one financial transaction or whatever it is. You need a timestamp. There's some additional data that can be included for tagging or sorting. If you want to reason about the person involved, right, or the people involved, you need a resource tag and a name, right, a tag for the name of the activities. So if you do all that, then process mining software will generate a process map for you. And rather than talk about this map, if you've seen BPMN before, you recognize this is a variation on BPMN, a slight simplification of the standard notation. And you get a sense for how the process works. But let's watch a demo here in a minute of that. One other note, there's another technology, that's getting a lot of press over the last year or two that I'll, for example, Pega calls workforce intelligence. There are a couple other names floating around for it, but the basic idea is that it monitors, instead of system logs, right, handing it the SAP logs, it instead resides on your laptop as a user, and it keeps track of everything you're doing. So what you get is process mining more about system logs and events versus workforce intelligence approach, which is more about individual user activity. And so I'll get what happened in SAP versus how much time you're spending emailing things around about SAP, the work you're doing in SAP. It'll also give you stuff like, how much time they spend on Facebook or browsing, shopping on Amazon versus doing their work, right? So it is technology that has some controversy because, it tracks everything you're doing while you're doing it. And it has value, right? You get these footsteps of what someone does to get their job done. But it also has some other things to make sure you're thinking about and just understand that at least for the duration of collecting that data, which you might just do for a pilot period for a few weeks, that there's a little more invasiveness, involved in that. And that the kind of process information you're getting is really what that person does, not what the whole company or the process is. All right, let me hit play on this demo. This is sort of the feature I always love, is the ability to look at how it impacts people within the process versus how it impacts the process activities. Right. I apologize for the volume on the music. I understand that we might have woken everybody up.
Fully awake
And
now. Yep. Cheers.
yep,
Yep. I'm awake. Yep.
yep. Well, if the coffee didn't do it, the volume on
Yep.
our video.
I'm drinking Stewart's
Uh,
coffee. I'm good. I'm awake.
that's so, Lance. I mean, to me, this brings up if I can do all this automated, right? And I do see how it solves some problems for me that I've had in the past when I try to discover processes. Like I remember doing a project where we could not figure out what was going on in the system. We had to interview people in different roles, and they would get into almost fistfights over what the
Yeah.
other person's job was, right? Because they didn't agree. But they're using the same mainframe system, and I'd say, well, can't we just talk to the guys who wrote this? And they're like, well, they're not around anymore. And like, no, really. Like, I mean, we could pay them a contract rate or something, just advisory. And they meant, no, those guys have passed on, right? They're in the, where coders go when they pass on into the next world. And and that was a real wake up call of like, okay, we how do we figure this out? But at the same time, I can see limitations in this sort of data driven approach, right? So, what's your take on how do you marry these approaches together?
Yeah. No, and that's a great question. And I think again, it's the next set of tooling that can be, extremely helpful. Most processes, that we see, um, what do you typically see in a process model that someone's handed to you? You will see basically, the boxes, the lines, the swim lanes. So in a process, there's much more to a process than who does what and, the boxes and the decisions and the activities. Um, what you're looking for is who, what, when, where, and how much. Why is what you need to figure out, why it behaves a particular way. So again, when you talk about it that way, you need to be able to look at kind of the whole and the details in one shot. And data is a data mining, process mining tooling, which is stuff is relatively new but very powerful. That can help bridge that gap. And it depends on being pragmatic about it. How much do you really need to understand and know? And it may be in a situation, as Scott explained, we run into several times, especially with legacy systems or down level systems, where there's not a very good understanding of the behavior between the human to human interactions and the human to system interactions, where this is kind of the Rosetta Stone or the keystone of the process, any particular system. So these things fit together really well. So when you don't have that kind of tooling or the data insight, you want to be able to marry this up and use more traditional discovery techniques. When I say traditional, only because they carry a name like Lean Six or voice of customer, voice of business, value stream mapping, or customer journey mapping. Give it another year or two, we're going to have another paradigm, guaranteed. But all of these techniques are, forgetting about the name or the label of them, these things are very effective in the right hands, and you take the discovery techniques, and we can get into it here in a second, and marry that up with something like process mining, then, again, if it makes sense and it's practical and pragmatic to do so, put these things together, and it could save a lot of time and even increase the confidence level of what's really occurring, in your
Right.
various processes.
Yeah, I mean, I know one thing that we've seen when it's a time just not to try to do process mining is when you just don't have time, right? If you want to get a best guess at discovery in a week, you probably don't have time to do the data preparation, right? And
That's
get
right.
access to the system and do that work, right? You just have to resort to interviews and talking to people. And you can get 40 hours of that done, regardless of how much, system integration work you can do in that time. And we've seen that happen before, where the timeline just dictates that we have to give up on certain approaches that are technically sound but take more time. But when does it make sense to go back into the toolbox and use something like Lean Six? Because I read Dilbert comics and they say it's dead. So
Well,
Dilbert
it
says
hasn't
it's
been,
dead.
yeah, I don't know. Well, it hasn't been replaced with anything. And again, it's evolved. I think
Right.
if you're back to your point, and I mentioned before about being pragmatic about something, it does come down to, you know, what is good enough, right? I mean, most process problems that are out there aren't at the, highly complex, highly sophisticated. We're trying to eke out 0.2% additional yield or productivity, right? And these kinds of realities, right? You don't need to back up a bus, unload 15 people, spend 4.5, 5 months just doing discovery and interviewing and that kind of thing. You want to do things a little bit quicker, right? And it makes sense to do so. These are when you start to look at these kind of techniques, right? Again, it's not practical to get that kind of data, then these would fit fine. And you can measure this in days to weeks, not weeks to months to do it.
Right. What about something like value stream mapping, right? Like that's a term a lot of people have heard, but maybe don't really know. Like, when would I even do that?
Yeah. So value stream mapping, it's communication art. It's another technique versus BPMN. But in general, in value stream mapping, what you're actually trying to do is you want to be able to see the whole and the details in one shot, as I mentioned before. And you're doing that because you're trying to identify in the process what are considered value add, what's considered non-value add, what's maybe considered required non-value add, and what those things are. Value add is basically, these various tests that get run. There's only 3 of them for something that would be defined technically as value add, which is it's done right the first time. The customer is willing to pay for it, right? It's a transformative thing in the process, and that the item itself, whatever it may be, it could be an order, it could be a claim, it could be any number of things, an update to a patient record. It's transformative in that it evolves through the process. That's value add. Non-value add is what they call just pure waste, right? So that's rework, overproduction, wait time. These are kind of the waste areas.
Yeah.
That doesn't have value that is required because of regulatory reasons or company risk, corporate risk profiles. They want these kind of control systems in place. So value stream mapping is a technique for that value stream analysis, value add versus not.
Right. Right. And I think another element that's maybe hard to pull out in an automated way is really customer journey mapping, right? There's some elements that get tracked in your system, but a lot doesn't. So what are your thoughts about how to bring that into a process discovery approach?
Well, it's again, understanding that processes, they're never disconnected. There's always a link there. And this is why we see a lot of things happening where, companies may be, in various departments improving their own specific, processes that, they were responsible for. And the thinking is the sum of the parts make the whole, meaning if everyone's doing some work on each one of these steps in the value stream or in this process, well, then the world's going to be better. Well, and it typically is not true at all because the goal is different, right? What the business is looking for, what the company is looking for, and it could be a increased customer experience or customer SaaS scores, NPS, whatever it may be. And just doing these sum of the parts don't necessarily make a difference there, right? Customer journey mapping would be, I want to understand what my area is and what everyone else's area is related to what that customer experience and journey is, right? And it's never linear. It's not like there's a start point and an end point because it's a circle, right? It's a circle. It always comes back. And for the customer journey, you can overlay that on top of value stream mapping. You could do it in and of itself in isolation from a value stream map. But in general, these are techniques to kind of understand what your correlation or causation is to that customer experience. And again, plopping that down on, again, communication art, right? Whether it's you're doing, value stream mapping, other kind of lean flow notation, or BPMN, you could plop this stuff in on that.
Right. Well, another area that we've talked about, and we've been involved in projects around this, are, I have a process, but we're planning to double revenue, and I know the current process will break, right? So, I think we listed out a couple of things that people often want to design new processes for, right? Or to operate within. You want to pick and choose out of this group, which one you want to focus on?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's different. Typically, back to the sum of the parts equal the whole, right? There's certainly typically an end game, right? And it's going to be some financial model. It could be revenue generation or revenue protection or cost avoidance, cost savings, or some form of risk mitigation, right? But there's usually very discrete financial models, and you may see both sides of the ledger, right? And those are certainly the most valuable processes to deal with, is if they do hit both sides of those ledger in some form. So, again, back to customer journey mapping. If you're looking for higher customer satisfaction scores, you're going to be doing customer journey mapping with that, right? If you're looking for increased profitability, well, typically, the first thing you do is look at where costs are versus where revenue could be, right? There's the aspirational, new products, launching new products, things of that nature. But then there's the overall cost structure. Let's remove waste. Increase profitability, value stream mapping would be something that you would probably typically look at that for that. Removing the rework, same sort of thing. Doubling my revenue, that could be something along the lines of any mix of the above, right? Because usually on the revenue side, it will have to do with some kind of, enhanced offering, new service line, new product line. It could be, a bank could issue, a new class of credit cards, you name it. So these kinds of things typically involve multiple disciplines to, ascertain how do I go from where I am today to doubling revenue. And then there's, revenue leakage, which is a problem for a lot of companies, which is different than cost avoidance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have to think there's some cases where, doubling requires effectively constraint, reduction, right? Or relieving constraints that prevent you from, either fulfilling that kind of revenue.
Sure.
Or doing it profitably.
Right. There's a notion of whole thing around theory of constraints that talks about subordinating constraints. Actually remove. It's basically all about eking out the highest level of utilization you can. You feed a constraint with the cleanest work to get the most out of it. Then decide, is that enough, or do I actually need to completely remove the constraint?
Right.
So this is a good chance for our next poll question. So what metrics does your company use to measure process? And it's a multiple choice there, so there might be more than one answer there. Generally, I guess there will be more than one answer to Lance's poll.
Right. And Krista, I forgot to ask, when you're running these polls, are you sharing the results so everybody sees them?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I noticed there was a button for me to do it, but I wanted to just double check.
Don't push buttons you're unsure of.
That's right. And there's a big red button.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, pretty balanced.
That's interesting.
View on that poll result. As you can all see, the majority of respondents are, actually focused on a combination, right? Each one got a majority result. Right?
I think time is interesting because in the trifecta of, cost, quality, and delivery being time, of all the things that you actually can tweak and modify and work with, time is the one you can't get back. It is typically the most precious resource in that triad, and the one that, obviously you want to put the most attention on.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Potentially. Sometimes it's not about time.
Yeah, we've seen cases where people over-optimize on time and they actually end up hurting the customer experience, and it ends up, backfiring. But
right,
yeah. Well, Lance, there are a couple other thoughts, or slides to talk about, maybe in terms of, discovery in the context of taking on these sort of digital age, right, and rethinking our business. Do you want to lead us through a couple of these thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, and this is profiled after an established pharma company, but this could be literally any company, your company. The world is the world, reality is reality, and nothing's perfect. But in this particular, scenario, understanding kind of the breadth of what you're attacking is important. There is always the risk of doing something that's so myopic that the real value and yield of it is tenuous to ascertain, to try to figure out, and certainly not necessarily a good springboard. And of course, you hear the other side of the, the pendulum, which is, well, you don't want to boil the ocean either. So it's like, an example of understanding, the problem statement is pretty key here, because if you had a problem statement that says, hey, I really want to reduce our batch time from 24 hours to 12 hours, and that's the whole project, because we feel like that's going to provide something. That may be too narrow, right, of a scope or yield. At the same time, if you have a problem statement that says, we want to improve the HR onboarding globally for our company. Well, globally, that's a good indication that that's a real broad type of problem statement. So when you look at these things, you kind of figure out what are the problem areas and be able to codify that in a statement. And I know it sounds almost pedantic to sit there and say, well, really, how much is a problem statement, a paragraph, going to keep me, on the right track or whatever else? And I'm telling you, it is absolutely critical to have the right problem statement, because that will influence all of the different directionally where you could go, but keeping you really on the rails of what is going to be important and where you should actually focus things.
I think that point you made, Lance, is so important, right? Framing a question or framing the problem affects every other decision you make.
Everything.
Right? And
it's everything.
I've often been confronted by decisions that I find really untenable, right? Like someone asks me the question, and in the way they've asked it, there's no good answer. But if I can take a step back and reframe the question, then there are good and distinctly different answers, right? And so I think that framing is critical.
Yeah, and when you see here, like, the EX issue, employee experience issue, employees don't believe in our transformation that we've attempted now 2 or 3 times. It's the digital illusion, versus digital transformation. And I'm not even sure I'm not hedging. I don't like the word transformation. Looking to transform. They're looking for relief, right? They're looking for flexibility and options in what we do. And that's our life, that's our work, right? We need to grow and defend market position or CX issues. The healthcare providers in this case, aren't served. Now, all of these things are effects typically, right? They're an effect of a root cause. And in process design engineering, that's actually what you want to tackle and try to understand. Normally there's more than one root cause, but there's usually not a dozen, is to understand what is the absolute root cause, because these are all effects. People experience these effects. And in process design and discovery, certainly in process discovery itself, the goal is to understand root cause or root causes. You can't stop at events and effects, right? This happens. People will patch that stuff and band-aid it because they feel like hitting the root cause may be too hard. Or that's, the problem. The reason why we can't fulfill our deliveries on time every 5 days is because sales is treating the world like Burger King, and they can sell any configuration and guarantee anything they want, and we just have to deal with it. So we're going to improve our process to be able to deal with it. You're never going to get ahead of that, right? You're never going to get ahead of it until you're able to do that sales merger here, as an example. Yeah, and the express needs. I think when you interview folks, you're not just trying to get the sense of, all right, well, how does work for you? You also want to get what the experience is for them, because they may be doing a particular task or function, let's say, that no one's happy about. We all have something in our jobs that we really would love if we didn't have to do it. Time and expense. Anybody, right? It's a drag. But understanding what and how that actually fits into the whole. It's like, you're asking this of me. I'm doing this task. I'm doing this function. I'm trying to understand what's in it for me. They may get a better understanding of it if they understand how they fit in the whole, whether it be the customer journey, customer experience initiative that everyone's trying to elevate, or it could be employee experience that, a company is smart enough to realize, hey, we're talking about this customer experience stuff, but unless we really give a better experience for our employees in general, this is a lost cause, guys. We're going to hit a wall. We'll only have incremental improvement, not kind of breakthrough improvement that we all envision. Express needs are an important way of understanding that through discovery. and codifying those out.
Right. I think that's very true. And I like the way you give examples of how the kinds of things that get expressed that you capture.
Yeah, I mean, this is, this is everyone's work. Well, man, here's our ambition, and we're going to do this and this and this, and the notion is we need to increase our NPS by 5 or 6 percentage points in a year, and then you hit the reality of it. So you've invested in that new front end, whether it be a website or a commerce vehicle or mobile app or whatever it is, and man, it's going to be killer. And then things don't go the way you hope, and from a customer's standpoint, and that's when the customer gets to meet your operational reality. They get to see it and experience it themselves. Airline travel, back when we were flying, miss a flight or the flight got canceled. Well, how good is your app now? Most people just throw onto Twitter, hey, I'm stuck over here. And there's a line in customer service, it's 25, 50 people deep, and I need to get home. Right? I mean, you know how it goes. So you're everything you experience, be it in the mobile app world or online, whatever your medium is, whatever device, whatever time, wherever you're at, there are edges to that. And actually, if you think about it, can I design the process in such a way that I can enhance the value? I can take care of the corner cases I know is really going to create dissatisfaction for the employee and for the customer, right? Customer service agent. Oh, man.
Yeah, no, this reminds me of, several times we've talked to clients where that really part of helping them was understanding their brand, right? And their promise to, effectively the promise their brand is making to their customers. So understand that brand promise. And then we look at the operations and you can understand why they're asking for help,
right?
Because their operational capability does not live up to the brand promise. So it's about, let's deliver a process for you that delivers that brand promise to your employees and to your customers. Because what you're doing today isn't doing it, right?
That's right.
And if you have a brand that says, for example, my furniture is amazing, and you should buy it and use it, and it looks amazing in your living room, and it looks amazing in the catalog, and we can customize and do all these things, that's great. But if the operations don't live up to that brand, it undermines everything. And,
that's right.
And it happens all the time when you have a great product, but as your company grows, you don't have a chance to go back and revisit to have a great operation to support it.